I'd like to welcome Stefanie Pondini, Head of Policy and Advocacy at the Biovision Foundation, for your session. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Does it work? Yes, now it works. Thank you so much that you're here today, that you're interested in the topic from grants to growth. We are expecting more people to join. Please don't mind if people are still coming later on. So our goal of today's session is to learn from each other what works, what doesn't, and what needs to change. And by the end of this session, we would like to answer one question. And the question is, how can we practically support agroecological enterprises to scale and to improve their impact ecologically and socially? With the right finance, with the right support, and the right conditions. So we will get back to this question at the end. I want to shortly introduce the host organization, Biovision Foundation. We are a non-profit organization based in Zurich, Switzerland. We have around 60 employees, and we work in Switzerland, we work in Africa, focus is East Africa, and we work on an international level, mainly with our policy and advocacy work. And we strongly believe that agroecology is the key approach to transform our food systems. And we do that with 5 main levers to make sure agroecology can be scaled and promoted. The first one is we work with very strong local organizations, mainly in East Africa, to develop agroecological production systems. The second lever is that we spread information, knowledge, and disseminate it, mainly with farmer organizations, but also we disseminate information and knowledge to policymakers, to research organizations, academia, and so forth. The third lever, and that's also why we are here today with this topic, is to promote agroecological enterprises and markets. We strengthen civil society engagement and organizations in Switzerland, but also beyond. Be that consumer organizations, but also civil society groups. And last but not least is we promote and support political conditions that favor agroecology. We do that mainly in Switzerland and in East Africa. Kenya and Tanzania and Uganda are our focus countries. So how does this session today look like? We will have a short exercise, an activation exercise after my intro. And then we will have 2 key inputs from Biovision, from Piera, Waibel and Fabio, Leippert, on what are agroecological enterprises, because I'm sure not everyone in this room know what that means. And we will present to you the first agroecology accelerator that we established. After that, we will move to a very exciting panel discussion, and this will be then closed with some closing remark by an honorable guest that we have here today. And the wrap-up will be with you again. We will do some voting exercise. So you don't have to be worried. We will do some exercise at the end of the session again. So I know people are tired. People attended many sessions. We have a lot of competing sessions again. So let's get a bit activated. Let's kind of move a bit. So what we do now is, I'm going to read a series of statements, and you can always answer it with yes or no. When you answer it with yes, you need to stand up and then sit down again. I know we have these movable chairs, but I'm sure it still works. So, yeah, just if it's yes, stand up. If it's no, you can re-seat, still keep seating. And then stand up again, so that we move a bit. Is it clear? Let's do a test. Stand up if you found Davos warmer than expected. Okay, you got it, huh? So, stand up, so sit down again. Stand up if you work in finance. Okay, you can look around a bit and also see who's in the room. Sit down. Stand up if you work with farmers or producer organizations. Oh, that's interesting. Look around if you want. Sit down. Stand up if you are from an NGO or a foundation. Good. Stand up if you traveled more than 10 hours to come to Davos. Okay, we will take care of you. Stand up if you traveled across at least one border to get to Davos. Okay, good to have you here, thank you. Stand up if you have invested in an SME in food system. Okay, interesting. Stand up if you are on your second or third coffee today. Yes. Okay. Or tea, maybe tea, huh? Stand up if you have founded a social enterprise and found the process challenging. Who has founded a social enterprise and found the process challenging? Okay. Stand up if you are here the first time at the Green Up Climate Hub at Davos. Okay. Stand up if you are attending official sessions at the WEF. And now it gets a bit technical. Stand up if you think capital is ready for social enterprises, but the pipeline isn't. Stand up if you're here because you want practical solutions and not just talking. Good to know. And welcome the ones who joined. You can all stand up if it's yes, keep seated if it's no. Stand up if you felt the tension between impact goals and financial returns. Yeah, look around, yeah. Stand up if you're attending this event mainly out of curiosity. Good, sit down. Stand up if you don't know what agroecological enterprises are. Come on. You don't know what agroecological enterprises are. Please, come on, stand up if you are not really sure what these type of businesses are. Because otherwise Piera will have an easy job, you know. And stand up if you're here today because you want to learn more about agroecology. Great, thank you so much. That was fun. And I would like now to introduce our first speaker here on stage. This is Dr. Piera Waibel. She is the head of international partnership at Biovision Foundation. And she, for the ones who didn't know what agroecological enterprises are, she will explain it to you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Steffi. I will keep it short then, because everybody knows already. But just like the last days I've been here, I think I've never heard the word agroecology. So I think it's still kind of necessary maybe just to set the scene a bit and get everybody in the subject that we are talking about today. So agroecology is on one hand a science. Steffi showed that we are funding a lot of science projects as well in agroecology to prove that the systems are working. It's a practice from farm to fork, so really a holistic approach, but it's also a movement to foster a transition of our food systems. And I think I don't need to explain the audience here that our food systems are broken, but that's the aim of agroecology overall, to really move up the system change level up to really a level where we have a food system which is equitable and environmentally sustainable. Agroecology is based on 13 principles. I'm not getting into details here, but it's about resilience, about social equity, and last but not least, about resource minimization or optimization. Then linked to that, what are agroecological enterprises? Of course, that's enterprises that are on one hand somehow active in the agri-food value chain. That's one of the requirements. And they need to have a commercial aspect. So it's not about foundations or like NGOs or social organizations active on the ground. It's really commercial entities. And they need to embody the principles of agroecology. It's there are a lot of, like, the definition of agroecological enterprises is quite broad, based on a lot of organizations that have developed these definitions. And 6 of the 13 principles need to be touched by an agroecological enterprise, otherwise it's not counted as one. Biovision has developed a tool called BACT, to check if an enterprise is in line with agroecological practices, or how much it is in line, or if it counts as an agroecological enterprise. So that can be used quite easily to see where an enterprise is. Maybe what is also important to say, that it's mostly based on local food systems. Of course, export crops could be part of the things grown on the farm, or that are part of the food system, but the focus is really on creating food systems which are locally viable and are based on local food sovereignty and food security. That's maybe a bit of difference to other concepts that you've heard during the last days. Then there are also, there are also some red lines defined. If an enterprise touches one of these lines, it's not counted as agroecological enterprise. Things like monoculture, or really systems focused really on an export or on a cash crop only, these are not agroecological enterprises. Companies that hamper or destroy local seed systems would not be counted as agroecological. Or, for example, also systems, or you can also say and businesses that foster or that focus only on the productivity, on these outcomes of a farming system, and forget about the social and environmental outcomes. So those outcomes really also need to be focused on. There are some other red lines, but I picked out the ones I personally think distinguishes agroecological enterprises mostly from other types of social or sustainable SMEs. Then what does Biovision do in this area? We actually have a portfolio that tackles somehow or touches upon agroecological enterprises. The newest one is the flexible funding formats that we launched this year. They are present at the moment in all of the countries, or our focus countries we are working in. That's Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Zimbabwe, Malawi, and Ethiopia. That's really very easy, small amounts to entrepreneurs or to people that we see in the projects that we are supporting, that have an idea that could develop potentially into a business. They get very easy access to first funding, just to get their ideas starting. Very non-complicated, not with a lot of reports or monitoring and whatever we usually have in our projects. So the goal is really to focus on learning, to get the people going, and to give them the space and opportunity to think further in what they are thinking to develop. Then we are heavily funding Agroecological. That's a startup studio based in, at the moment, Uganda, but they are launching it Tanzania as well this year, and they have they usually work with soon-to-be entrepreneurs that really have already a kind of somehow viable business idea. They work in cohorts, they train them, they give them the tools necessary to develop viable business models, and then they get some form of start or start funding to get the businesses going. We have a third element, but I wait for that a little bit, just to give you an example of what one of the, at the moment, quite successful enterprises is that is funded through or went through a cohort and the funding process of Agroecological. It's Eden Seeds, based in Uganda. In Uganda, 85% of the farmers, they don't have access to affordable and productive or good high-quality seeds. That's why they had the idea to organize farmer groups. They train the farmer groups to grow or to produce seeds, local indigenous seeds, so nothing imported from elsewhere, how it's usually happening in a lot of countries. Then Eden Seeds collects these seeds from the farmers. They check the quality, they code them, they ensure that the storage is done right, and then they resell it to local shops, which then again can sell it to the farmers. And in the first 18 months, they already made a 24K USD in sales, and could reach 1,500 farmers with that. They have quite big plans to expand over the next years, and we of course hope to see them be to get more successful, so that ideally they could get in our third kind of pillar that we have, that we work on, agroecological enterprises. Nature, I'm not going to say a lot about this because that will be the topic of the next speakers, but that's then really for more mature enterprises that can go to more scale and on higher investments as well. And of course, what is needed, these companies are usually, or these businesses are working in environments which are not necessarily always very favorable to agroecology. That's why we also need the enabling policy environment, and that's what Steffi also already mentioned. We are working quite a lot on advocacy and policy enhancement to improve the ecosystem that these businesses need to flourish in. And with that, I give the mic back to Steffi. You have.
Yes, but thank you so much, Piera. Thank you so much. So, Piera mentioned Nature, the accelerator and fund. That's the first agroecological accelerator that we established together with Shona. And this is Joachim Evechu, the co-founder and CEO of Shona. He couldn't come to Davos, unfortunately, but we really wanted to kind of get his opinion, his perspective into this event, and that's why we are going to show you a short video. He's answering some questions, and then my colleague Fabio will dive into deeper into nature, so what it really is. So let's hope this is going to work.
Hey everyone, my name is Joachim Evechu, and I lead our team at Shona, one of the key implementing partners of the Nature Accelerator Fund that is supporting the growth of agroecology enterprises in East Africa. Agroecology enterprises are pivotal in food systems transformation because they support farmers that are practicing agroecology, providing them with access to the organic inputs, support services, and output markets they need, promoting the practice of agroecology. Agroecology promotes the production of healthy and nutritious food while regenerating soil fertility, improving biodiversity, and strengthening the livelihoods of farmers and communities. Complementing all the incredible work that has been done so far to support farmers to transition to and practice agroecology and positively transform our food system, agroecology enterprises provide the economic engine that is required to grow and sustain this transformation. Because farmers are able to access the organic inputs they need and earn an income from their agroecological produce, incentivizing their continued practice of agroecology, and consumers are able to access healthy and nutritious agroecologically produced food continually through the power of markets. Agroecology enterprises are agribusinesses, but they're different because, firstly, they are committed to the 13 principles of agroecology. And usually we select enterprises that are practicing at least 6 of the 13 principles of agroecology. They also do not cross any of the agroecology red lines. They are connected with their customers and beneficiaries, who are mostly farmers, either by selling to them or sourcing from them. Agroecology enterprises are expanding in East Africa. They continue to face some significant challenges, some that we're trying to solve through the Nature Accelerator Fund. Some of these include the access to the right mix of financing to help them grow as AEEs and be able to transition to agroecology themselves, but also help farmers transition to agroecology and operate as viable businesses. We're currently investing in these enterprises through the Nature Fund, providing flexible capital tailored to their needs for both working capital and the acquisition of assets to operate as an AEE. We continue to see the need for more instruments, though, that need to be blended smartly to help these enterprises to be able to grow. The other challenge they face is access to the right business development support to grow. Like many businesses in East Africa, agroecology enterprises too struggle to get the right support to grow, and they are more complex as well. Through the Nature Accelerator, we're providing this support, beginning with identifying them, to helping them design an agroecology business plan, to helping them strengthen their business operations, to helping them certify their products to access new markets, and so much more. More business development support tailored to the needs of these enterprises is needed across all stages to encourage and support their growth. The other challenge they face is competition with non-agroecologically produced products and the lack of differentiation in the market. While aware of some of the dangers of some of the food currently produced with chemical pesticides and fertilizers, and the evidence of the preference for healthy and nutritious food, customers are not yet fully aware of the existence of an alternative, which is agroecologically produced products and the existence of agroecological enterprises. A lot needs to continue to be done to tilt the favor and demand for agroecologically produced products by consumers, driving the production of these products and keeping the price of these products competitive and not premium, knocking out a large section of the market. And lastly, there's still a lot more, but my last is on government policy. We need a favorable government policy that not only promotes the practice of agroecology, but also heavily regulates current practices of producing food using dangerous chemical inputs. When policy, consumers and the market, capital and business development support align, agroecological enterprises will thrive and agroecology will become the norm. Thank you.
And now we will hear more about nature by my colleague Fabio Leippert. Please, Fabio, join me on the stage and tell the audience a bit more what this vehicle is about to strengthen these type of businesses.
Thanks, Steffi. And before we dive a little bit into the inner workings of nature, let's recap a bit what Joachim said. So what holds agroecological enterprises back? And we know, we've done our studies, feasibility studies, they are around, they are a bit immature, but there's a lot of ideas, people with good ideas, startups, but they hit the ceiling after a few years. And so they don't get the finance needed. They are perceived as too risky, too complex, too slow, not really scalable. That's one main obstacle. There's also a mismatch with the support services offered financially, but also in terms of technical assistance. And then there's Joachim said it, the enabling environment is lacking or is suboptimal and geared towards conventional agriculture. So knowing these challenges, we made the effort and did extensive feasibility studies, scoping studies with the movements, with other financial providers, with technical assistance providers, etc. in 21, 22, 23. And then we launched, and now let's see if I push the right button. What we've seen, Nature, an accelerator and fund. And so it's there for 3 years now. We have worked with 60 enterprises, agroecological enterprises so far, and it's meant to stay. So it's designed as a revolving fund linked to an accelerator that really helps the businesses to get into the stage of getting a loan from the fund. And the feasibility study has really shown that for agroecological enterprises, that linking of an accelerator and a capital entity, a fund, is something that could make a difference, because often that linkage is lacking. The ticket sizes they would be able to achieve are bigger than what they can really absorb or what makes sense at their stage. So that has informed that design of nature. Focus is Kenya, Uganda, and I would say important is also to realize that all the upfront investments and the pilot is grant-based, right? It's grant-funded by Biovision and our back donors, namely SDC and IKEA Foundation. So that has been the seed funding for getting this started, getting this element, this important element of an accelerator and fund going to bridge these enterprises to become investable for other actors. So what is nature? It contains of 3 C's basically. First one, capacity, technical assistance, which equals the accelerator part, right? So what we offer through nature is selecting enterprises. We heard which ones. Importantly is also to mention they need to be somehow regionally owned. So one co-founder, CEO, needs to be from the region. 30,000 revenue generating, growth oriented, in line with agroecology. And then we select 30 for a pre-boot camp and 20 for a boot camp, residential boot camp of a week, where they get all the tailored technical assistance they might need. So commercially viable business model, strengthening financial acumen, investment readiness, supply chain development management, navigating market systems. So all these classical business development service elements, but we link them explicitly with agroecological elements and supporting them to optimize, to clarify, to work on their business model, also from an agroecological perspective. Yeah, and after bootcamp, very tailored mentorship and coaching, as well as helping to differentiate the market further, find new markets, etc. And after all of this, what we've also seen as one of the main hurdles, many of these entrepreneurs, many of them women, are pretty alone at the moment in their field. They don't have a peer network, they don't have colleagues, they're pretty, as businesses, still immature. So we start to create an ecosystem, a network of enterprises, of peers who can help each other out. And having by now 63 agroecological enterprises in these 2 countries, we see quite an energy starting also from that perspective. Then second element is the capital element, second C, equaling the fund, right? That's really where the best of these enterprises can apply for a loan. A loan with a ticket size in the missing middle of 10 to 15,000 K US dollar in local currency, and that's really where the market doesn't offer loans, because either it's microfinance, which is smaller, or it's bigger, and we really intentionally want to fit that gap. It's debt or revenue share loans, so 2 modalities for working capital or assets. And market rates are sub-market, concessional, but still quite substantial for what we know, but that's the reality. And the repayment rates and conditions are pretty flexible, tailored to the realities of these enterprises. Remember, they are quite diverse. They come from different sectors. I haven't shown the slide before, but 50% are aggregators, processors, 20% input providers. There are also some platforms in that portfolio. So it's a very complex, diversified set of enterprises, but that can also work together. And yeah, so conditions are pretty context-specific, enterprise-specific. On the bottom, you see the investors in the fund, which is separately fed by separate donors. And at the moment, the volume is at 1.1 million, with the intention to grow, of course. 400,000 have been already approved as loans. Some paid back, 15 loans so far. The goal is really to deploy all that capital in the course of this year. Remember, it's 3 years old. It takes time to get this going, but it's really meant to stay and grow. And lastly, third element, the C, I talked about this already, the connections, right? The connections between peers to new markets, to new expertise, be it in BD, business development service provision, technical assistance, be it in agroecology, and especially linking the two, which is what is one element which is really unique in this. And then potential partners and peers. And as we've seen before, this whole thing also only works if the regulatory environment, policy environment, becomes a bit more favorable as well. That's why this whole vehicle, its creation, is embedded in Biovision's policy work, policy program, so we can also share the lessons, we can talk about it, we can others inspire to replicate or to invest in it, or, and that's where also the follow-up panel will go to, link to nature and our enterprises, follow-on capital, working with bigger actors who can then absorb the pipeline. So coming to the conclusions, after these 3+ years working on this, yeah, capital is really key. It doesn't work without, but it's insufficient at this stage where these enterprises are. So we need a more systemic approach. We need to integrate TA, enabling environment policy work, and linking the accelerator and the fund, capital and capacity, is really a success factor. It also helps the fund to get to know the personalities, the enterprises really well during the boot camp, during the accelerator phase, helping the financial analysts to do a proper due diligence, because in the end, the fund also has some risks to manage and cannot just take up enterprises and give loans out of goodwill. But that means blended financing of the whole vehicle. We are financed by grants, and others directly invest into the fund. And yeah, flexible design, co-creation. You've seen Joachim, he's CEO of Shona, really amazing implementing partner. Biovision, I have one seat in the steering committee. Then we have an investment committee, which is external experts of the finance world, who then say yes or no to investments, basically. Integrating entrepreneurship into agroecology, quite a new field, 5-6 years that we work on this with our partners, with the movements. It's really an emerging field. It shows there's potential, there's impact. They can grow if they get the right support. One of the main things is really giving that bridge from grants to growth, from grants to loans, out of this grantpreneurship trap, let's say, where you really have a different mindset. And as an entrepreneur, it's just, yeah, it's something, how to say, not all are grantpreneurs, but there's the risk of many of these enterprises coming out of philanthropy, not having a fully thought through business case in their back, so we and our partners work on this with them. Lastly, yeah, patience, sensitivity, it takes time, this maturation of AEs, this whole type of capital is meant to be patient, and we also need to take care to manage that balancing act. Steffi asked it in the beginning, between profitability, increasing profitability, and keeping the social, ecological impact goals. And yeah, networks are key, that's why we're here. We also want to share what we're doing and talk to colleagues, to related organizations and bigger organizations who could absorb these enterprises, really about this larger network and about creating this ecosystem of support to make agroecological enterprises more successful and more impactful. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Fabio, you're also on the panel, so you can stay and just take a seat. Because now, So we are moving now to our exciting panel discussion. So I would like to invite the panelists to join us on stage. So we have here Tanja Havemann, co-founder and CEO from Clarmondial. Give her applause. Come on, we need a bit of activation, right? We need to keep going. We have Patrick Elmer. He is the founder and CEO of iGravity. Hello, Patrick. Thanks for being here. Oh, du musst nicht über, ich würde. We have Fabio Leippert, co-head of the Policy and Advocacy Department at Biovision. Ich brauche keins. And last but not least, we have Stefan Kappeler. He is partner and COO of elea. Thanks for joining us on stage. Great. So I will have the first kickoff question that I ask to all of the panelists as a kind of introduction or to get started. And I also kindly invite you to say a few words about you and your organization that you're working in. And then we will just have a flow of, I hope a bit an interactive discussion. But the first question, please, everyone answers it, and then we see how we go. So maybe I start with you, Tanja. Please say a few words about yourself and your organization. And then the question is, in your experience, what is the single most important bridge that helps agroecological enterprises or similar type of businesses move from being these grant-supported pilots to really scalable investment-ready businesses? So from grants to growth, that's the title of this event. So what's the bridge?
Great. Well, thank you very much, and really interesting panel. So my name is Tanja Havemann. I'm the co-founder and director of Clarmondial. We work primarily in sub-Saharan Africa, but also in Central America and Indonesia, working through value chains to reach smallholder farmers and have positive impacts on nature, specifically looking at climate and biodiversity. So we created actually a fund that uses a value chain approach to get additional working capital financing into supply chains, using an innovative de-risking model. And we are really excited to be expanding that soon with the Green Climate Fund. And in addition, we're working on other structures, including actually something very similar to what you're doing in Indonesia with a local partner. What we've seen over the years, and one thing that is very obvious when you're financing, is just the ability to have stable, predictable cash flows and revenues that you can use to actually finance off. And a lot of that is actually also based on customer relationships, both relationships with those that are buying the products as well as those that are supplying the products. And we use those kind of relationships also to be able to enable financing. What we see in the agricultural sector, and I've worked in the agricultural sector for many years on the financing side, is that actually most of the financing that goes into agriculture doesn't come from the formal financial markets, it comes from within the value chain. So either in terms of advances or prepayments or different types of intermediate funding solutions. And that's not just for emerging markets. That actually also happens in Europe and in the US. So we see that the links between the different entities in the supply chain are really critical, and underpinning that is obviously also trust. So I think therefore also being able to connect different partners that can be trusted counterparties to each other, come with technical assistance, is really critical. So we've been fortunate also in our work to have connected businesses to companies that have become long-term offtake partners for those entities, which has enabled them to raise financing both from us as well as from other impact investors. So we see that this sort of trust and being able to have stable, predictable cash flows is really central, be they larger organizations or smaller organizations.
Thank you so much, Tanja. Patrick, can I move over to you?
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Patrick. I'm the CEO and founder of iGravity. We are an impact investment management and advisory firm specialized on supporting SMEs in emerging markets with private debt and technical assistance. We work with both philanthropic partners and more commercial investors, really bringing them together in different impact investment strategies. And in my view, thinking about the bridge from grants to grow, I think for me the main lever is the mindset of the entrepreneur. So shifting from a project mindset towards a business entrepreneur mindset, really focused on the customers and their willingness to actually pay a price for a certain product and service. And obviously they need access to finance, and especially patient finance from investors that understand their business model and that they're generating both commercial but especially also social environmental returns. and they need also obviously a lot of hands-on support to succeed.
Thank you so much. Stefan, do you agree, or what do you think? I mean, who are you? And then what do you think is the most important bridge to go from grant to growth?
Thanks, Steffi, and hello, everybody. My name is Stefan. I'm here and representing elea. Elea is a philanthropic impact investor. We were founded in 2006, so celebrating our 20th anniversary this year, with the goal to fight absolute poverty with entrepreneurial means. Now, you might ask yourself, why am I sitting on this panel if it's about agroecological enterprises? And I think this goes very much hand in hand with fighting absolute poverty, because most of the people in emerging economies are smallholder farmers, around 70% of them. And they often live as subsistence farming, and are very closely connected, obviously, to their soils and dependent on the yields that they generate from their soils. We identify or we screen on a yearly basis around 1,000 ventures globally, Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, India, and Southeast Asia, and invest in about 5 to 10 with ticket sizes of 100 to 500,000 US dollars, typically in the seed, pre-Series A and Series A stage, and then work together. And I like that very much, what Fabio, what you shared before from the nature, but also Rutical example, that money is one part of the equation, but know-how is equally important. I mean, even the best football clubs in Europe, they don't have just good players. They also have good managers at the side who coach the team. And I think every entrepreneur out there needs money in order to grow. That's the blood in the engine, obviously, of an enterprise. But they also need advice and coaching and monitoring to grow their ventures. And I think this is one of the limiting factors. I mean, when you sent me the question initially, Steffi, I wrote up similar to what Tanja said. I mean, after all, when you're an investor and you want to attract capital, unit economics have to add up. And you have to show that you can generate the profit, maybe not immediately, and maybe not like a fintech where you have a hockey stick in the end. But at one point, you need to prove that there is economic sustainability. And one challenge that I see with agroecological, or that we see also in our day-to-day business, is that there are limiting factors to that, namely knowledge and capital. And the knowledge thing is particularly for smallholder farmers, and it's one of the 13 principles, if I read correctly, that defines agroecological enterprises. It's this knowledge dissemination and the working with smallholder farmers and sharing experiences and best practices with them. The capital in that form, I see more capital to bridge time. Many soils are actually depleted after many years of mismanagement. And you can't just transition from one day to the other and expect to get higher yields. I think in your paper, studies have shown that you generate higher yields with agroecological practices, but this doesn't happen just overnight. And so how do you get there over time? Because farmers, they need an income now. They don't have the capital to sustain like 3 to 5 years until they have come over this valley of drought, so to say, until they have higher yields again. And I think that's a very important thing that investors have to be aware of. And when you asked the question initially, is it more the pipeline or is it more the capital that is the restraining factor? I think it's both. It depends. Sometimes there is enough capital out there, as we saw leading up to COVID-19, where we had so much capital in the market. But then in certain sectors and in certain spaces, it's definitely also the pipeline of good entrepreneurs. And that's why the work that Nature and the Rutical are doing is amazingly important.
Thank you so much. Fabio, do you want to finish this first round with your bridge?
I mean, I had a fair share of speaking time already, so you know about Nature. That it is definitely one of our bridges, as well as Rutical. But yeah, for me, it shows who's here. It's about several bridges and helping the whole continuum of pipeline building at farmer level, then entrepreneur supporting. And in the beginning, these enterprises just need good coaching, good support. We might bring in also this agroecology angle a bit more to entrepreneurship, but then it's really linking it to capital. And maybe at the moment in Uganda, Kenya, we saw the need to really also bridge financially this missing middle ticket size of 10 to 50,000, which is really not available. But then it's building bridges to other organizations such as elea for equity investments, also with Bali, that iGravity is creating other entities, and then in the end maybe Clarmondial and bigger funds can come in. So it's linking these pipelines and continuing to build that pipeline, because ideas are around, solutions are there, so we really need somehow to keep this going.
Thank you so much. You talk about investing. So Patrick, if an agroecological business or similar business would approach you tomorrow seeking capital, what are the 1 to 2 conditions that need to be in place for you that you would say yes?
I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I think really it's the evidence of customers willing to pay, you know. So the product and services, there is a market and there is somebody willing to pay, and the price they're paying is higher than the cost of the production. Mm-hmm. And then next to that, obviously, they need to have a plan, like a realistic, credible plan on how to develop, grow, and scale, which is often, you know, very closely related to the quality of the team. So it's not only about one founder, but it's usually a team you want to see of people. You don't want to have a key person risk. You want to see some signs of a governance where there are other people involved, and you don't have only one counterparty. And you want to see that the business is putting in place systems and procedures according to which they operate.
Tanja, do you see it similarly or differently? What do you think? What needs to be there that you can confidentially say, yes, we will invest in you?
I mean, I can only agree with what Patrick said. So obviously having good governance, track record of good practices, solid and stable customers and business partners. Maybe just to throw a wrench into the discussions also, because we like to talk a lot about climate finance, which we're also excited about. And I think the reality is, in many of the markets that you're working in and that we're working in, I mean, we're working in some places like Benin, northern Nigeria. You know, the reality is that there are not so many willing customers that are willing to pay extra for, you know, good practices. And so I think we also need to think, you know, creatively about other ways that there can be a stable revenue stream. So I think, you know, climate finance is one way, but we're also exploring opportunities for localized payments for ecosystem services approaches, which could be an additional predictable revenue stream that could also complement the more traditional type of funding. So I think just the quality of the business partners, the length of those relationships, and as Patrick said, you know, the governance and the track record and operations.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Do you want to compliment Stefan and Fabio?
Maybe just one word. The founders matter, the personality of the founders and the team. That's also something I really learned from Shaw now, who has track record in business development support. And so the accelerator linked to the fund really helps to understand these enterprises and their workings and the teams better, because you are in a residential boot camp for a week. And some of these enterprises don't have a huge track record. I mean, bookkeeping is the same conditions. Nature Fund has the same conditions. The numbers must fit. There must be revenue, etc. But yeah, the psychological element and the personality of these people is, according to them, really essential, I guess.
I agree with that. And so when we look at the venture in the due diligence, I think the team is the most important aspect to it. Obviously, the business model has to fit, and we have to see a path to profitability at one point. But the team is a make or break situation, and because you can work with a B idea when you have an A team, but you can't work with an A idea if you have only a B team. And I think that is really, we had to learn that as well the hard way. But it depends so much on these entrepreneurs, because you can't just let the CEO go and find a new one, because they are so intrinsically motivated for their cause and they are backing this venture. And so if it's an investment, it's not only an investment in the venture, it's also an investment in the people behind it. And I think beyond the team, it's the ecosystem around it and the partners. Many entrepreneurs, and it's interesting. We haven't done a study, and I wouldn't dare to actually say there are typology across geographies. But I think you figure sometimes out that some entrepreneurs really fear boards. So when we as an investor come in, we invest typically 80% of our investments are equity or equity-like investments, and we always want to have a seat in the board. And they see this as a very dangerous thing if suddenly an external partner comes in, and I agree. I mean, it's very important because it's like getting married, and you have someone who has a stake in your organization, who sits in the same boat, but is also very powerful, because marriage can also be a very powerful and nice thing, and it typically should be a very nice thing. But that you have the right people in boards, the right investors on board, because it always needs different ideas and also more capital typically than what is initially was anticipated. And so if you bring the right people around, then the likelihood for success is typically higher than when you try to get through it by yourself.
Tanja, you saw and you worked with a lot of enterprises. What do you think is mainly the primary bottleneck of these kind of type of businesses that we talk today? Is it more on the entrepreneur side? Is it the financial side? Or is it maybe even the ecosystem that is not in favor of what these type of businesses need? What do you think? Where is the main bottleneck? Or is it everywhere?
I mean, I think it's everywhere. You know, we work in places where people are not literate, where there is no infrastructure. So those are just huge practical bottlenecks. I think, you know, one, as mentioned before, I think one thing is just on the cash flows. Not only do they have access to customers that are going to pay them on time, whatever on time means, you know, how are they going to pay them? Also their suppliers, you know, are they going to be delivering on a regular basis at the right quality, at the right time? So I think all those kind of things fit together. So there's like everything together all at once.
Does make it more easier, right? So even more complex. Do you agree, or do you see? You said, Stefan, you screened many enterprises or ventures so far. Do you always see a bit of tendency to one of these, entrepreneur side, financials, or ecosystem, or do you agree with Tanja? The challenge is everywhere equally.
Equal is a strong word. I think there are challenges everywhere, that I definitely agree, and I think it depends on timing, geography, maybe sectors as well, where you have one a little bit more on this side, one a little bit more on that side. As I said, what we noticed and what we also see data from, when you particularly look at Africa, I mean, there was simply too much capital available in around 21, 22, like as a positive backlash, so to say, from COVID. When the funding firstly declined and then suddenly peaked, only then to decline again towards 23 and 24-ish. But at that time, funding was not the issue for many companies, right? But this has changed. Now funding has become way more challenging, with interest rates going up, with also general climate globally changing in terms of investments in emerging markets. Priorities have shifted a little bit. Certain topics suddenly are not en vogue anymore. And these things you feel immediately, right, in these markets where we operate in. And again, the poorest of the poor suffer the most.
Thank you so much. Yeah. You please?
No, I was going to say that I think, you know, we also, like you did mention policy before, we have seen that as being huge impacts, not only in terms of access to capital, like, you know, I think in one place in Uganda, there was a tax suddenly imposed on mobile payments, which then like disrupted the whole payment system. And then you have, you know, in Ghana with cocoa boards, like, you know, supposed to be able to provide inputs, not providing inputs. in providing inputs late. So then in Nigeria, even airlines couldn't get their money out of Nigeria for over a year. It was stuck there. So these are just, issues that you have to find ways to structure around and deal with, but they can be dealt with.
I think beyond agroecology, there is a fundamental problem with access to finance for SMEs, the missing middle SMEs in emerging markets who are not able to access the financing they need, or if so, at conditions which are unbearable. In Uganda, for example, where we work, local banks lend at 20+% and ask 150, 200% collateral. So most businesses can not even deal with that. And then I think, most businesses need longer-term patient capital, but the lending is short-term because it's the best way to manage the risks in that environment. So it's really a difficult one to
tricky
solve.
situation. Fabio, you want to comment?
Yes, something that Tanja has mentioned before. I mean, one of the structural flaws is that all the positive externalities created are not rewarded, and the negative ones are not punished. So the whole system is allocating its resources not ideally, and definitely not in favor of agroecological enterprises, regenerative enterprises. So I see also a chance in finding new ways of creating additional revenue flows for these enterprises, for clean water they provide, for biodiversity they generate, for carbon sequestration. We know these systems are really tricky to monitor and to quantify. But for me, this is must be one of the ways out to adjust a bit the rules of the game. And the other side would be to punish the polluters, which is a very political thing. But yeah, compensating for the positive externalities would be a great way forward. Interested to hear more later.
Yeah, you made a link to a next question, actually, so I had to jump a bit, but it's a good hook now. So agroecological enterprises and similar type of businesses, they generate a lot of ecological and social values that the market doesn't reward yet, or doesn't reward at the moment, right? We know that. And what do you think, what are the best ways to make sure that these values, these impacts can be measured, but without too much of a burden for the SMEs? Because we know monitoring evaluation, it's really costly, it's very intense for the enterprises, but at the same time it's needed. So how do we balance that? What are your experiences? How can we make sure impact is measured, but still manageable by the businesses? Tanja, you are looking at me, you want to answer?
Sure, so we, the funds that we work with are impact funds, but we like to be practical about the KPIs that we look at. So although there are some regulatory requirements around looking at specific KPIs, we want to make sure that the KPIs that we track are also relevant to the credit decisions that are being made and to the farmers. So we try to make it as easy as possible in terms of developing very simple tools, which actually many of them are, the businesses we work with are very excited to have, because it helps them also actually attract customers and build customer loyalty. We also think in general that there is, and I have also been on the advisory board of SBTI, and I've worked with Vera, VCS. We work with another client managing a substantial portfolio of insets and offsets. And I have to say, I think we've gotten a little bit too crazy on the MRV costs. And there are some very practical things that we know and that we can track at the farm level, and then combine those with sort of landscape level, geospatial or drone-based surveys to see what the trends are. And that's something that we've been working on also together with the Stockholm Environment Institute, to try to develop also something that's going to be open and available to everyone, to be able to kind of shortlist and pick relevant indicators across climate change mitigation, adaptation, biodiversity, and watershed health. So we look forward to kind of sort of sharing more about that this year.
Sounds very exciting.
Yeah, we work with different types of investors. Some are seeking financial returns with impact, and others are really trying to maximize impact with some returns. And one of the things we do is called impact-linked finance, where we actually work closely with the Swiss Development Agency, where we provide financial incentives to enterprises for outcomes they actually generate. And the way we do that is either by lending to these businesses, and where the interest rate is linked to impact KPIs. So the more impact they achieve over time, the less is their cost of finance, or by using impact incentive payments, where basically we enter into a service agreement with the businesses, where we actually provide a monetary value to the outcomes they generate, and that triggers payment over multiple years. And so impact becomes almost an additional revenue line for these businesses.
Very interesting. We have heard, I'm sure the last couple of days everywhere, the word blended finance is the solution. Blended finance is very important. What do you think? When is blended finance really catalytic, really a solution that needs to be there, and when there is a risk that it can really distort markets, and how to deal with blended finance in a very smart way? So what are your experiences? When does it make sense, and how to best deal with it?
To go first. So we are fortunate enough to actually work with the US Development Finance Corporation, who still, despite what is happening today, actually remains a solid and reliable partner. So they have provided a partial guarantee to a financing structure that we have, which they've actually made money on. So that guarantee really helps actually to reduce the cost, the kind of perceived risk of an innovative financing instrument. I think there is one part around blended finance, which is around when you're coming up with new financing structures. People, like investors, have not seen them before, so you need to have some years where you're testing them out. So I think there's that kind of perceived risk element. And then there's kind of very practical transaction level risk. OECD would not call it blended finance, but our innovation is that we use the supply chain actors and the customers to de-risk those transactions, and that's proven very successful. And I think the third thing is, I do think we have to recognize that in many of the systems that we're looking at, the kind of impact outcomes that we want will need to effectively have a subsidy forever until we reconfigure our economic systems. So I think I get a little bit concerned if we're looking at, relying on donor aid to just, pay, because we've seen that that's not necessarily reliable. Unfortunately, the changes in the perceived quality of carbon credits, has also been a concern. We've seen businesses in Tanzania, for example, be stranded because they were relying on payments for RED, which I think are maybe no longer going to come. So with this thing I hinted at, we're also looking at new models where we can generate really many decades worth of PES payments, which can also be used at the very, very micro level, because I think we get subsidies here in Europe, there are subsidies in the US, and if we want to actually have these practices be taken up, there will be a requirement to have very, very long-term patient subsidized capital delivered the closest to the ground that we can get it.
Fabio, I'm sure you want to...
Tanja said it. I mean, yeah, I feel like us being a grant giver, philanthropic organizations, we can use these to build readiness, to link to other capital. I think it's great that there's a push in that direction, and many philanthropic organizations are opening up in that direction, realizing also the pool of money that is rather shrinking than growing. But we also need to be realistic that, Tanja said it's not gonna dissolve. We're gonna need these grant-based de-risking elements in the whole thing. Otherwise, I feel, speaking for AEEs now, for instance, they will not get to the level of being uptaken by other actors, by other types of finance. So yeah, for me, not coming from the field, more from the agroecology, development cooperation, biology, agroecology, this is the way forward. somehow finding blended finance models to support entrepreneurship and the type of production we need to support.
Patrick?
If I can just add, I think for me it's clearly something that needs to be temporary. In an ideal world, I mean, the local financial institutions, international investors would supply the capital that companies need, you know. And if that's not happening, it's because obviously the risk perception is somehow not making them comfortable to do so. But I think at the end of the day, we need to work towards making ourselves almost redundant over time. You know, it cannot be that there keeps being grant and philanthropic and blending. I think there needs to be a graduation, right?
Can I just say, just distinguish on the two things that I said. So I agree that the things that can become commercially viable should become commercially viable. But we have to recognize that there will be many things that will stay too small, too local, too impact first focus, which we need if we want to have a better world, which will require some sort of subsidy forever. And I think we should just recognize that because, like, you know, we're not doing anything different here. So as long as we have the economic systems that we have, oh God, I sound like a hippie or whatever, but like, you know, that's the reality. I mean, people in Europe also bank on having the agricultural subsidies and the caps and whatever. So I completely agree that, like, you know, we should have, and that's why we have a fully commercially viable financing structure. We work with commercial things, but we also have to recognize that, you know, many of the things that we want to do also will require that subsidy forever. It needs to be regular and predictable and all those kind of things, also for the cash flow reasons for them. So
you're absolutely right. If I can just add one thing, I also think not everyone needs to have an enterprise. You know, there are also hybrid models or NGO. I mean, depending on the impact and the model, one legal structure may make more sense.
I think from our view, it's a challenge to identify which ones are going to become a hybrid model or stay grant-based models or are becoming financially viable, because you mentioned this term grantpreneurs, exactly. And I mean, it's kind of comfortable to rely on grants. Sorry to say it straight away like this, right? And but how do we figure out which ones are the entrepreneurs who really have the ambition themselves and also then the skills and etc. and the model behind it to make that step, because it's a fundamentally different thinking. If you have received grants over a certain period of time, or if you have to earn your costs and get to profitability through looking at the unit economics and cost savings, etc. I mean, we had an example very early on in Cameroon, in the cocoa industry, where an NGO wanted to become a social enterprise. And I never doubted their intention that they wanted to become a profitable enterprise. But the mindset of the whole team was always that, well, there was always money, and so, okay, if we paid a little bit more for the cocoa, it didn't really matter, right? And so we had one example where people went to the field with a bunch of money to actually buy harvest, and they came back and only bought like 80% of what was agreed. And in earlier days, that didn't really matter because somewhere some grant funding would have come in and would have covered it. But suddenly, when you need to rely and you have a target and you have numbers that need to add up, that doesn't work. But that's why I said I don't blame anybody, but I think this is really a challenge to bridge this step.
I just also add one more thing that maybe makes it a little bit complicated, but it's also interesting to think about, you know, what is really a subsidy? Because, like, for example, we're seeing in quite a few of the value chains that we're working in, the reason that the financing works is because there's some, you know, international buyer that has a specific affinity for that cocoa or whatever and is willing to pay above, you know, the fixed market price for that. So is that a subsidy? I don't know. And similarly, you know, payments for ecosystem services like, you know, watershed health or climate, you know, are these things, you know, are not necessarily priced in properly to our economic systems, but can be set up as a small, you know, micro outcomes-based payment. But, you know, I'm not sure, you know, so it's just an interesting philosophical question. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Fabio, you wanted to say something before?
Yeah, maybe a very hands-on example, and about distorting the markets. When we set up Nature, the least problem we thought we would have is like competition through grants. And we had like 2 companies that went through the full due diligence process, would have get a loan, really strong companies, and they retracted in the last minute because they got offered a grant. So, and that happens, I guess, everywhere. So I'm fully with you. The trick is to see where it makes sense and where it's needed, instead of subsidizing enterprises and investors that would do it anyways without blending in public capital or grants.
I made before this rather told this rather sobering experience, but I also want to share a positive notion there. And I think since I'm working now for 15 years, or I'm 15 years with elea, and what we've seen over this time was also an incredible increase in entrepreneurs who really want to get a profitable business with a social and ecological impact up and running. And that's really encouraging to see. And I think if I look back 15 years ago, it was really difficult to see these ventures, and I think you probably would agree. And today, I mean, if you look at East Africa, but even we have lots of investments now suddenly in Nigeria as well. And so these, as long as there is a kind of a stability in these markets where entrepreneurs can operate and investors can actually go to and deploy capital, we've seen a tremendous uptake of entrepreneurs, and I think you see that as well in your programs where they apply, and then you have this competition between grant providers and investors. But I think that's really an encouraging signal for society. Right?
Thanks for this positive thing in this really dark time. It's good to also have some positive examples.
I just wanted to add, I was on a panel a few months ago where the main question was whether you would prefer to launch and start your business with a grant or with equity capital, and was a very difficult question to answer, because obviously the grant gives you much more flexibility, but the equity investor puts you much more on a disciplined path.
And what did you say?
Me personally, having done it as well, I really value the equity journey, finding investors who believe in what you do and support you, but also give you that discipline you need, to generate the cash flows from the beginning.
I think when you put yourself into the shoes of an entrepreneur, I mean, our realization is you need always more money than you initially anticipate. I think that's a reality. You always overestimate revenue and you always underestimate costs. And ideally, you would have obviously the right mindset. We spoke about the team, but you would have in the beginning enough capital not to worry about how do I pay my team next month. Because many of the entrepreneurs that we come across, they're fantastic personalities. And if they have the freedom and if they have investors that back them and give them the freedom, so act as the secure base, they actually can really think long term and can set up processes, etc. And for that, grants can be an advantage if the people have the right mindset behind it. But if you have enough capital at the outset, and many founders are young, typically not from wealthy families, so they don't bring in a lot of their own money. But if there is enough money and you just know from the beginning you might have cash for the next 12, ideally 24 months, then you really have time to think things through and do things properly. And those who struggle from the outset, basically like in a wheel, and what do I do next month, and where do I get another salary payment from, then you're almost doomed to fail.
I would want to cover a bit a different topic. We heard it from Piera. Agroecological enterprises serve primarily local markets, so agroecology really wants to make sure local communities benefit from their services, from jobs, from income being generated. So what do you think, what is the difference between enterprises serving primarily local markets and those who export mainly, and what are the challenges, especially for the local businesses, also when it comes to financing?
I'm happy to go first again.
Thanks, Tanja.
Obviously, there's pros and cons to both. I mean, we've seen, local business. Unfortunately, we could not fund them, but the local businesses that are selling for local markets that are extremely, professional especially in East Africa. I have to say, there's a very high standard, I think, of many SMEs. But obviously, you have a challenge that you are working in a market where you may have very, very volatile currency or, political situations, which may also influence sort of movement of goods or people or workers. So I think that just adds a lot more kind of complexity on one hand, but then, if you have the exporters, I mean, sometimes they have some of those same problems, sometimes because they're a little bit more substantial or they're bringing foreign currency into the country, they get maybe a little bit more space, but then, they have to deal with other things like, European organic laws all of a sudden changing, or like logistics routes happen, like, impacting their ability to get product to clients. So, but like, obviously they have the advantage of, for example, arbitraging between the cost of borrowing money in UBS versus in, EcoBank in Nigeria.
Patrick?
Yeah, we manage a fund called Balim, with two foundations as anchor investors, which has as an objective to improve livelihoods of people in rural areas in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa. And we actually face this dilemma, because there is strong focus on food security, so more these local food value chains. But we also see that the risks are much higher. So we're actually discussing, what kind of allocation between the export-oriented, which are less risky because they generate hard currency, because they have recognized buyers, they have a track record working with them. You can set up tripartite agreement, and how much to allocate to the food security. So there is this bit of this tension between the impact food security and the financial stability. I don't think it's black and white, I think it's more about calibrating and as we build the relationship, I mean, I think you need to start small, but especially with the domestic value chain SMEs, you start small and you can grow with them as they show you they're able to pay you back on time.
Stefan, what are your enterprises focusing mainly on, export or local markets? And why are you choosing those?
We have both in our portfolio. We have very successful local enterprise, for example, East Africa Foods, operating in Tanzania and now expanding into Kenya. Very fascinating entrepreneurs, a couple who founded it, buy from local farmers, aggregate the food, bring it to the urban centers and supply both the HoReCa markets but also the informal markets. Hugely successful, really impressive. I think from an investor's point of view, the smaller you are, the more difficult it is to export, obviously. It doesn't mean that you can't export, but you need to go through local aggregators. And there you really have, as always, you have good guys and bad guys out there. But as a small company, you have almost no chance to tap into the global market. We have invested now in a cocoa business, in organic cocoa business in Nigeria. They work together with about 10,000 smallholder farmers, an impressive amount in terms of impact. But when you speak, and there's no blame, I understand where this comes from, but when you speak to the large chocolate manufacturers here in Switzerland, I mean, they say like you need to produce 5 times more before we even start talking to you, right? At the same time, I have also to say that most of these large chocolate manufacturers also run under their CSR activities some local aggregators where they help the smaller ones to come there, but it's a very long process. But that's why I think you need kind of catalytic patient capital to get them there, because a commercial investor would not invest. And it just takes time until you have the quality right, until you have the amount right. And when you work with 10,000 smallholder farmers, and you need to guarantee quality across the board, because it really matters, right? And if you can't sell a container, that's a heavy loss. And I think there it just needs time to get there. But there I'm very confident that the progress is the right one.
Fabio, at Nature, what is the goal? Is the goal that all of the enterprises also, provide for the export market, or it's not even a goal and we say no, local markets are equally?
I mean, as Biovision and our allies and the movements, I mean, the goal is to create regional value generation and jobs and fight poverty. So from that perspective, it's not a defined pathway. So in Nature, 50 out of 60 are producing for the local markets, some a bit mixed, but the focus is on local markets. Those who export are really also successful ones, and I'm really glad to hear from your perspectives that you see it equally. It's not, one is not better than the other, but when I listen to the discussions, for instance, in the last boot camp, there is this conception or this expectations from many of these entrepreneurs, organic certified export markets, that's where the money is. And I've witnessed really fascinating discussions in this cohort between exporters and non-exporters, or some who have even gone away from exporting or their plans, doing the full calculation, costs for external third-party certification, changing rules, etc., versus serving a local mass market and finding a way to differentiate your product in the market, which is a challenge, right? If you produce agroecologically healthy food, how do you show that to the customer, and how do you avoid that? Other give the same label, so participatory guarantee schemes is a big topic. We have a grant component in the accelerator that helps enterprises exactly doing that, certification, PGS, light certifications. We work on that also in the policy space because it's also a regulatory question. So if you manage to differentiate your market, your product, then yeah, both is working.
Yeah.
We have time for,
of course.
Because I think what you also mentioned before, the advantage of export-oriented businesses is that they bring in hard currency. Mm-hmm. And most of the investors, they invest in dollars. And we had this example in Nigeria where we invested at the time when the Naira was 400 to the dollar. And 2 years later, it was 1,600 to the dollar. And that means even if you grow locally, if you only produce locally, how can you ever satisfy the return expectations of a commercial investor? It's impossible. I mean, 4 times growth in agriculture with smallholder farmers, I mean, forget it. The margins are so small. We're not a fintech or a biotech company, right? And I think hard currency has to be earned, or you have to have local currency loans, as you mentioned it, or patient investors who say, okay, we can also forgo or defer loans. And that's why I think many strive for export, because that gives security, and that attracts on the other hand, then also, again, commercial investors. Mm.
So we actually need to wrap up this panel discussion, but I have one last question to all of you, and you didn't know about this question. So I will start with you, Tanja, again, because you were so kind, always answering first. So if you go back to your 20-year-old self, just starting out in the food system impact finance, what's the one thing you wished you understood earlier?
At that point, I mean, I still thought I was going to become a scientist running around, like, doing soil analysis in the tropical rainforests. I never thought I was going to be having a business and working in finance. So I think even having told that I would be here today would be, I don't think I would have believed it. So I think just we are, and I've said this a few times in different things, I mean, I think we are just so incredibly fortunate to be here in, here in Europe, here in Davos, with the opportunity to meet, so many wonderful connections and people doing all sorts of really cool things. And, I don't think we should feel guilty about that. I think we should look at that as a privilege. And I think that we should be confident that, we can actually do something positive despite all the crazy nonsense that is happening in the world, because the vibes that I'm getting, the people that I'm sure that you're meeting also in these places, like, there's no way yet that anyone is giving up on trying to, fight for a better world. And so I think just be confident and, take the privilege with the sense that this is an opportunity.
Wow. Patrick.
Yeah, I was probably still dreaming about a soccer career in my 20s. Never really gave up on that. But I think as you get older, you learn about the complexity of things, I mean, there is probably a sense of idealism in all of us, trying to make it a better world and help as many as possible. But as you get older, you depend on others, especially when you raise money with investors. You would like to distribute it across hundreds of companies you see, but then you realize it doesn't work, because there is somebody knocking at your door the next day. So you're only going to be able to help 5 or 6 or 10. So there is a sense of frustration not being able to really fully bring the change along that you were hoping to.
Stefan.
I'm a glaciologist and cartographer by training. So in my 20s, I spent time in the mountains looking at glaciers and who disappeared in the past 20 years now. But with a focus on what I do today, I think what I learned over these 15 years is it's amazing what we human beings are able to do, both positive and negative, obviously, but that when you identify the right individuals and you work with them and you bring together the right individuals, the power that unleashes is really great and gives me goosebumps, even if I say this. And I think this is really something where, a community also here at the WEF and knowing that there are great people across the globe that I worked with or that I traveled to, and this was really something that should give us all hope and should be inspirational.
Now I have goosebumps, thanks. Fabio, it's not so easy to be the last after all these inspirational statements.
Yeah, so I'm a biologist as well. I was catching birds in the valley, so and then realized without tackling food, we're not going to help conservation, biodiversity conservation, without tackling land use and agriculture. So I went there, and then policy team, right? And I wouldn't have questioned that now in 25, the whole system of multilateralism, all the collaboration structures we have would be questioned and maybe shaking a bit. And I'm getting back to what you said. So working now on this angle, 2 things: financing the agroecological transformation, that is still the core of what moves me, and finding new allies, other sources of finance, and not relying on purely these policy mechanisms and these great climate conferences where we worked a lot, etc., but finding other allies and other constellations and building on that collaborative spirit that has really risen again here in this today, feeling, okay, it's not as bad as you might think when you read news and you're a bit further away. So I wouldn't have changed my job choice, but maybe we would have gone a bit earlier into this direction instead of relying only on public funding and grants, I guess. So I'm happy where we are, and I'm really thankful you came here and we have this discussion.
Thanks, yes. So big applause to this amazing panel. Yeah, you can disappear from the light. I would like now to invite our honorable guest, Christian Frutiger. He is the Vice Director General and Head of Thematic Cooperation at SDC, Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. Please, a warm welcome to Christian Frutiger. And we asked Herr Frutiger to talk a bit or share the perspective also a bit from a public donor side, and also maybe making connections what you've heard today in this session. So the stage is yours. Thanks for being here.
Thanks. Can I sit down?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, well, look, thanks a lot. It's been an inspiring afternoon. Of course, the last session, having to have the final word at the last session at 5:30 after a week at the World Economic Forum, particularly a week full of interesting developments, to say it kindly, is maybe is a bit difficult. I have to admit. So. The other thing is, I heard there is an apéro right afterwards. So I see a little bit of fatigue already in the room. But nevertheless, and I think I'll start with this last statement. From grants to growth, going earlier into a different type of development cooperation, a development cooperation that invests, that enables, that catalyzes. Not that he didn't do anything of that before, but it's simply the mindset is different, and also the skill sets are different of all actors in that system. So development cooperation as a catalyst for systemic change. Yes, we have less money, and yes, we will probably have even less in the future. So, which means that incremental sort of, gradual changes won't do the trick anymore. So we will have to take a few fundamental leaps. Now, this is not going to happen from one day to the other. It actually takes time. It takes time to build the systems, but really moving from a logic of grants increasingly into a logic of catalytic change, and using donor money to mobilize private funding, to also make better use of the existing multilateral financial system, which first of all works at a sovereign level, so it's very difficult to do sub-sovereign local, which takes very little risk. It's also because all of us designed the system to take very little risk. Multilateral development banks, IFIs, could be much more aggressive in leveraging their balance sheets, and we would actually be able to channel more funding. And of course, a private sector, be that global or local, that is also just not used to working with the likes of us, and where also grants have actually covered a lot of the hidden costs. If you look at the disappearance of USAID covered a lot of the hidden costs of global value chains. So these costs now become apparent, which is actually, despite all the bad news, it's actually good news for us, because all of a sudden you will see big international private sector actors start investing much more in their value chain, simply because the production quality goes down, social and environmental issues in the chain actually become apparent and start affecting their business model. So there are opportunities in there, and it's now time to use them resolutely. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is 80-20. Perfect is the total enemy of good, so it doesn't have to be perfect. These are difficult environments. Also, difficult environments mean that, yes, maybe the challenges are higher, but the returns over time are also promising. We talked about blended finance today. Blended finance is, of course, in its various form, an interesting avenue to look at with de-risking. We do a lot of that first loss. Increasingly, we look at currency loss, because this is where, and we heard, this is where everything gets burned. It's impossible to have growth and profitability to compensate for this type of currency loss. Impact-linked finance is an interesting one. We've heard a number of examples also in how to move from grants to growth. Nature, another one is at CELI Africa. You actually also start getting the numbers, right? CELI Africa has a leverage ratio of 1 to 10, already mobilized 400 million of private capital across East Africa, 6 countries. So we start seeing the leverage. And then, yes, I'm a big fan of agroecology, so absolutely, I think it's one of the answers. It's not the only one. Of course, what is important is what happens after. And what we increasingly need to look at in the food system is, what is adequate nutrition? So we've tried to invest into nutrition funds. They don't exist. There is one or two. One of them is the N3F, so the nutritious foods financing facility, which we do together with GAIN. It's an open-ended fund. It's at 40 million right now. Also looking at SMEs, financing SMEs that actually provide nutritious foods for local markets. And here we come to your question on local versus global. A lot of this is for local markets. Agroecology for global value chains, yes, why not? They're interesting premiums, but we've seen all the challenges. But agroecology for local value chains is actually very interesting. But for that, you need processing capability. So you need this famous missing middle between production, transportation, processing, and then distribution and marketing. So we have to work on the entire system. Now, scale remains a challenge. We need patient capital, we need structured finance, we need capacity building. It's not the end of TA. TA will continue to be necessary. We need stronger market linkages, and we need courage. So it's, I think, time again for all of us. There are moments where you say it cannot really get worse, so you might as well be courageous. So this is one of these moments where, let's take some risk. Let's be courageous, and then let's also talk about it. We are a very confidential community, which is not very good at communication. I can tell you, and I've seen this again and again, and it's just, you just walk up and down the promenade. Marketing works. Marketing works for not so great stuff. Marketing works for things which are medium great. And marketing works really well for great things. So agroecology is actually great. It's just a term which is difficult to explain. So, but let's think about how we can actually do this better. And it doesn't have always to be grants. And yes, they can be phased out. And I give you one example. Patrick will recognize it. In Kenya, an agricultural input company through the Impact-Linked Finance Fund, 4,000 shops. They used to sell only synthetic fertilizers or fossil fuel-based fertilizers imported from abroad, like everybody does. So in 3 years, we've actually managed to change their portfolio. They're now selling 50% of organic, locally produced fertilizer. It's much cheaper, so it costs like half the price to the farmers, and the company actually makes higher margins. So the premium, which is not huge, they're using it for marketing purposes to the farmers and to a broader public. So they basically reinvest the premium for marketing. In other words, it can be done. So let's be courageous. Let's take some risk. If there is a moment to really move forward, it is now. Looking back, yes, that is the past. The future is what it is, and we actually know what it will look like. So let's use the opportunities we have, and let's gain some traction, and then let's work on the scale as fast as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Mr. Frutiger. Wow, that was really inspiring.
And sorry for staying seated. I think
It's fine.
I've also walked so far the whole week. So
we will do some
thanks a lot.
exercises again. So don't worry. So we began today with one question: how can we practically support agroecological enterprises to scale and to improve their impact, their social and ecological impact? I think today we didn't hear one single solution or a simple solution, but we heard words, we heard trust, changing mindsets, we heard courage, we heard let's just get it done. So we heard, or I felt, it's a shared responsibility. It's shared learning, and I think it's a real momentum that we can build on it. So I invite all of us, maybe outside with some drinks and snacks, keep the conversation flowing, start new collaborations, and just, as Mr. Frutiger said, let's get things done, because it's possible. So we will do some short final exercise. Oh. We don't stand up. Oh, it's bright. But we lean, so right and left. Let's get a bit close to your neighbors. So I read statements, and it's always left or right. So you can answer with leaning left or leaning right. So the first is, where should the next big push go? Left, local markets first. Right, export markets first. So, oh. Now I need to, okay, a lot of left leaning. What's most missing? Left, coordinated business support, or right, better policy frameworks? Okay, here we have some mixed answers. And what helps agroecological enterprises more in the next 2 to 3 years? Left, more flexible grants. Right, earlier access to repayable capital. So, capital, a lot leaning right. Huh? And impact measurement today is mostly left, a relevant task, right, a barrier to growth for SMEs. Okay, here we are not really aligned in the room. This is an interesting one. In 5 years, agroecological enterprises will be mainly financed by left, specialized impact funds, right, mainstream financial actors. Oh, here we are aligned, huh? Great. Right now, financing agroecology feels like a bridge under construction, that's left. And right, a bridge everyone agrees we need, but no one wants to pay for it. People are like, yeah, I'm not sure. Great. And now, it's not leaning, stand up. If you learned something new today about agroecological enterprises. Woo! I think we can give a big applause. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you very much to the speakers. And here are some links if you're interested. And yeah, the ones who still have some energy, maybe we can have some talks outside. So thank you so much. Thank you. Oh. Oh, group picture. So the speakers, please come here. We need to take a group picture.